Well, let's keep talking then about these games here in Paris and where the Paralympic movement is at. I'm delighted to welcome to the programme this afternoon Richard Whitehead. He is a two-time British Paralympic champion, winning gold in the 200 metres in London 2012 as well as in Rio 2016. He's live with us here in Paris this afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good
Thanks for joining
afternoon.
on.
Yeah,
Pleasure to
no, good
have you on the
afternoon.
programme. First of all, in an interview recently, you said these Paralympic Games here in Paris have the potential to be transformative. I wondered
Yeah,
what you
for
meant by
sure.
that.
I think it's around the real opinions, and it's an enrichment opportunity for the city. Obviously, as we know, Paris is such a historic city that was founded in the 4th century BC. And for me, being an athlete that even now runs around the city, and I really see an appetite for Paralympic sport. A lot of people are asking about my disability. Obviously, I'm a double leg amputee, so my disability is very visible. And people, while I'm running around the parks, running through the city, are asking about the Paralympic Games and also about disability, and to have more of a visibility themselves about inclusion.
And it is worth talking a bit about your own career because it has been rather remarkable. You've been representing Great Britain since at least 2006. That was in the Winter
Yep,
Games in the sledge
right.
hockey. You then moved on to focusing on running in the Summer Games. As I said, you've won a handful of medals for your country. I just wonder then, in the nearly 2 decades that you've been doing this on the world stage in different sports, look, what's changed for the better in terms of how para-athletes are represented, how they're supported, and where does more work need to be done still?
Yeah, I started in marathon running and then went to winter sport, and then obviously 12 years within the Paralympic movement, and now I'm back running marathons. My next marathon's in Chicago. But I think for me, the positivity around the Paralympics is real, starting to work on the enrichment of the world around disability, equality, accessibility, but there's still a lot of work around the word inclusion. I feel that the Paralympic movement doesn't represent the whole disability community. And when I say that, we look at some of the disability groups, such as the learning disability group doesn't have a big representation, the hearing impairment group, and also some of the impairment groups that are more physically disabled. So my event isn't actually in the games this year, which is a real disappointment. Your listeners and your viewers will, if you look at Richard Whitehead 200 metres London 2012, you'll see the great impact that an event such as mine has on the community, but also as being in Paris. I think it's really important that the people of Paris see a real variety of events and also see that disability is so varied and individual, and that you need to be very dynamic to support people with disabilities. I think if I was to criticise the Paralympic movement, it would be not being diverse enough
Mm.
and being seen more towards the able bodied eye. And for me, it needs to be more towards the person with a disability to inspire the next generation of leaders of tomorrow, which are young people with disabilities.
And you mentioned a word earlier that I wanted to ask you about, and that's accessibility, because as we've been talking about, you're here in Paris for these games. And I don't know to what extent you've been interacting with the Paris public transport yet, but the city did set itself
It's a struggle, right?
a goal of trying to be accessible for everyone.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you found that to be the case or not, because there are plenty of people with disabilities in this city who say, look, it was a good goal, but Paris hasn't achieved that yet.
Yes, and we all know that it does take time, but I think the Paralympics is an opportunity of enrichment. So that enrichment type might take decades to actually implement, and but there needs to be a starting point. And I really feel the vibe and the appetite for the people of Paris being around. Like, I get so many people talking about, I was running yesterday and somebody stopped me in the park and they were like talking about my prosthetics and do I run, and the Paralympic Games and disability. And it was amazing that young people and older people want to get more information about the actual impairments themselves. But going back to your question around the accessibility, I think the public transport is a real issue. Transport generally is a big issue for people with disabilities. And if we look at the stadiums themselves and see only people that are able bodied watching disability sport, I think the games would have failed. We need to have more people with disabilities in the stadium, representing all areas of the community, because seeing is believing, and you need to see that it's possible within disability sport. But there is still a long way to go with accessibility, but also the IPC, the Paralympic movement, need to work harder at representation of the disability community.
And just a final question for you, for viewers who are tuning in, who are getting excited now about the Paralympic Games, but perhaps aren't following the particular sports or the athletes that closely. Who are you excited about? Who should we be watching out for over the next 10 days or so?
One thing, well, while watching the opening ceremony last night, I feel really jealous of the French public having this opportunity. The French athletes really connecting with the public, and the spectators having the patriotic side of sport. But also, as somebody that loves Paralympic sport, generally I love the wheelchair rugby. Obviously, the Great Britain team were the Paralympic gold medalists in Tokyo, so for them to have a crowd in France and be like buoyed by that crowd is really important. With swimming's incredible, seeing all the disabilities overcoming their impairments to obviously get to the finish line. But obviously, being a massive athletics fan, like the marathon, the wheelchair marathon, something that I love watching, and the sprint events, like the 1 and 200 meter events, are kind of the blue ribbon events of the games.
So much for us to get excited about. It's been a
For sure.
pleasure to talk to you this afternoon and get your
Thank
perspective.
you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was Richard Whitehead, the British Paralympic champion. Thank you, sir.